Okay, so we actually don't have the presenters to the next item, so we will move to item number 13, which is the CCO, Council-Controlled Organisations, and the approval of the statements of intent. So we have Eddie and Alistair. Thank you. And just, councillors, I just draw your attention to page 177, where we have two changes to the report there, and it's been overlooked by Panuku in the amalgamation into Panuku. So using the word maximising and maximise, which was the old terminology of Auckland Council properties, it should be optimise and optimising. So that's been changed, and that will be in their final report. So just note that. Alistair, Eddie, thank you.
Good morning, councillors. I just want to start by refreshing you on where we are in this process. You'll recall that in December last year we sent letters of expectation to the CCOs setting out the direction we wanted them to take in their statements of intent. They sent in their draft statements of intent at the beginning of March. At the end of April, you considered shareholder comments to be sent to the CCOs, and on 30 June we received their final draft statements of intent for approval, incorporating those shareholder comments. So the purpose of this report is to approve the statements of intent that have come back, and as you'll see from the recommendations there, we're recommending the approval of 5 of the substantive CCOs and 3 of the legacy CCOs statements of intent be approved. I just want to make just say that the CCOs have done a really good job in general terms of responding to our shareholder comments, and in particular Auckland Transport, you'll recall we had quite a number of shareholder comments, and we had a really cooperative relationship with the staff and the board there, who have returned a statement of intent that's much improved. I do need to make note of, obviously, Watercare's statement of intent. We're not recommending for approval at this point. That's just a delay to sort out the issue around the group treasury function. We expect to be able to bring that back to the next Finance and Performance Committee meeting once that issue is sorted out. Thank you.
Councillor Casey.
I wasn't here in March or in April, and it's a process I would like to ask about. This is the end of a process, which means that, in effect, I can't raise anything today because the CCOs aren't here, through the chair.
Sorry, Councillor Casey, I was...
It's about the process. I wasn't here in March.
Yep.
I'm here now, and I've been through all the statements of intent. There's a couple of things that I'm not quite happy about, and I'm asking you what the process is for raising them, given that the CCOs aren't here. I'm happy to illustrate.
I know what you're specifically going to... If that could be raised offline with Alistair directly, because the CCOs aren't here to respond.
I want to raise it in front of my peers, though. It's
Actually,
not a private
okay.
conversation I want to have from a councillor.
Bring up what you're going to say. Go ahead.
Alistair, in our letters of expectation, each time we ask the CCOs to get closer to the source of funding in whatever way they choose to do it. In other words, acknowledge it's ratepayers' money that's funding their operations, funding their infrastructure. And in the reports before me, I see that RFA and ATEED mention that. Auckland Transport doesn't mention that. So that's one issue, is what's Auckland Transport doing to make that happen? And my second question would be, in terms of RFA and ATEED, for RFA, for example, I know that one building now has a plaque. How many of our buildings now have plaques acknowledging ratepayer money as the source of the funding? What opportunity is there for me to do that work? Should it have been done back in March? And is that the only opportunity that councillors had to do it?
Through the chair, no. I suspect if you want actual numbers of buildings and the like and what CCOs are doing, that's a performance issue, because that expectation is well understood by the CCOs. So I'm happy to work with you and the CCOs directly offline just to make sure that, you know, the buildings are appropriately attributing back to ratepayer. I guess I should give the general answer that is often given during this discussion, that quite often signage is replaced as part of normal renewals process rather than extra money being spent on it. But we can work with you directly offline.
Alistair, that was just an example. What I'd like to know from each of the CCOs is that how they are implementing our need to align closer ratepayer funding with what they do. They are spending our money. I've just cycled with a bus in front of me that talked about red lights and red eyes, and there's a big red eye and there's an AT logo, and I'm thinking, we paid for that.
Look, I think that's a discussion best in the performance discussions that we have with the CCOs when they come in here in front of the Finance and Performance Committee. It is an expectation that is should, and I suggest is well understood by the CCOs. So it's how that is put into practice rather than the expectation, which I think is the issue.
Except that AT doesn't mention it at all in this report here.
Okay.
Unless I missed it. But
We will pursue this, and I will say, Alistair, this is a bit of a perennial because it is about co-branding and how it is it possible to juxtapose two logos without compromising either one. So I think we know what it's about. It's not just plaques going up. It is that juxtaposing the co-branding if possible. So that's noted. Councillor Newman.
Mr. Chair, my question's to you, and it really relates to what has happened to the water care statement of intent. Now, we've got a recommendation set out at B that it will be brought forward to the September meeting, pending agreement on the centralised treasury function. Mr. Chair, I'm wanting to know, because I feel embarrassed that that statement of intent isn't here today. I feel embarrassed for the Board of Water Care and for the senior management that we don't have a statement of intent that we're signing off today. So what has happened or not happened where we've arrived here today without that statement of intent for an organisation that has to fund its capital program? Could you provide some clarification on that?
Well, it was really a process issue where a report wasn't there originally with the water care in it. Then it did get put off, and not all the authors signed off on it. So in the end, it was management decided it was best to withdraw that aspect of the paper. And the chief executive is going to the board meeting of water care at the end of the month to talk through this last issue, which is the treasury function, and that's what the decision's been made, and hence that's why it's been it's not here today.
Well, Mr. Chair, if water care is responsible for funding its capital program, and it doesn't take funding through the long-term plan, I would have thought, and I understand that there is a desire from some for a centralised treasury function here, but if water care has to fund its own capital program, then it needs to ensure that it's got the access to capital markets to raise the capital to get it through the unders and overs. And if I was a property owner in Avondale or in Panmure or in Mount Wellington, I would be more concerned about Watercare's ability to get on with the business of its capital works program, the development of the interceptors, rather than this technical argument around a centralised treasury function. And so I find I'm actually not comfortable with where we have not landed here today, because I feel quite uncomfortable as a shareholder noting that we've got the Board of Water Care who have a duty of care as directors to look after that company, that we as shareholders haven't been able to sign off a statement of intent. And I think that it doesn't, we don't look good here. I don't know if this has happened before, but frankly, if we are noting that it will be brought back to the 19th of September meeting of this committee, I'm assuming that that is wholly reliant on the Board of Water Care agreeing with our requirement for this around this treasury issue, which seems to be a matter of some debate, if that is the case. So maybe you or someone could explain as to where that debate is heading, because I'm not sure that it's necessarily in Watercare's best interest for that centralised treasury function to proceed if they need to get the revenue, if they need to get the capital required to get their asset development program underway.
Through you, Mr Chair, comments to the questions that have been asked. Just for clarity, Watercare does receive funding for their capital program through the LTP, and in fact, council parent borrows on behalf of Watercare, as well as we do with other entities within the council group. They historically have undertaken some of their own borrowing, which, as I have said in this committee before, the standalone credit rating is lower than the Auckland Council group, and the cost of funds is reliant upon the Auckland Council parent rating. With respect to the reliance on the board meeting point that has been made, that board meeting is on the 29th of August. The statement of intent is not necessarily reliant upon agreement on the centralised treasury function, more so is actually direction on whether it is going to proceed or not, and then the wording will be appropriately included in the statement of intent. As the Chair has noted, the Chief Executive is attending that board meeting, as is the Treasurer from Council Parent, as is David Wood from the Mayoral Office. I would also note that the Panuku Board is also going to meet on the same day, and they will be asked to approve the group policies on insurance and procurement, and then the group policies of all respect to procurement, insurance and treasury will actually be brought to the meeting on the 21st of September as well.
One follow-up, Mr Chair, if that's the case. If the board, if Ms Devlin and her colleagues at the board meeting on the 29th of August don't agree to this negotiation around the centralised treasury function, are we then signing off the statement of intent at the September meeting without that matter being addressed? What is the status of that debate at that point?
And through you, Mr Chair, if I could repeat what I just said, that following the board meeting on the 29th of August, whatever the decision is made by the Board of Watercare, the statement of intent will be worded appropriately to record that with respect to Treasury.
Okay.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Alistair, what I'm not sure of is how to question the targets that are in the statement of intent, because obviously that's the reporting part. By way of an example, on page 128, it says that the percentage of footpaths in an acceptable condition for Auckland Transport is 99%, but yet their target for the percentage of Aucklanders satisfied with the quality of footpaths is only 65%. So obviously they're going to report against those targets. How do we question them on some of their targets versus the information in the report?
Many of the targets contained in the statement of intent come directly from the LTP and are set through the LTP process and are simply dropped down and mirrored in the statement of intent. Now, that specific target, I don't know off the top of my head whether it's an LTP target or not, but the LTP is generally the place to have those discussions around what the appropriate targets are. First of all, because it is the LTP that sets a lot of those targets, and second of all, because a lot of the performance against those targets depends on how much funding that you provide.
So the 17-18, if I can supplement you, the 17-18 targets, are you using the former LTP?
Yes.
Even though we've given them more money in the annual plan, in the annual budget?
Yes, and sometimes when additional, although not all of the time, when additional funding is provided through an annual plan process, the LTP target may be amended, which flows through to the statement of intent, but not always.
So we've got to pretty much ignore the targets because they're before, and we can only really look at targets when we look at the LTP. So why didn't we look at targets when we did the annual budget?
We're drifting dangerously into finance processes, which I'm not the best person to comment on.
Sorry, we've got this. They're reporting against this, the statement of intent for this year and beyond. Beyond, I can see, let it go, LTP. But it's very important to actually be able to question them on their targets. I'm not quite sure when to do that. Justification thereof. So if it just means that we leave it and we ask them in their first reporting back, fine. But I haven't done this before, and I thought they were going to be here so we could ask them these kind of questions. They're not, so
So through the chair, Councillor Simpson, the appropriate time to ask those questions you wish to will be at the Finance and Performance Committee meeting on the 21st of September, which is the first quarterly reporting of the CCOs
thank you.
to this
Okay.
committee.
Good, thanks.
Deputy Mayor Cashman.
Thank you, Mr Chair. And just turning briefly to the water care discussion about their statement of intent for September 21. So given the fact that water care's debt is held on our accounts and that interest rates are credit rating dependent, their asset management program will still be able to continue regardless of whether their statement of intent is signed yet or not. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Thank you.
Member Taipei.
Kia ora, Mr Chairman. Just generally satisfied with SOIs, so not here to moan and groan too much. But AT, and I agree, if they're not here, it's very hard. But Auckland Transport, bilingual signage, I know it's not a massive priority for everybody, but it is for us. And it is a concern that it continually gets fobbed off to Whakangamua and Te Reo policy, when this matter's been on the table for a long time now. So some of our members don't want to support the statement of intent because it's so waffly in that direction. But we'll pursue, proceed with that. But I mean, again, I guess for yourselves, it is a major concern for us that it's not clear. It is just a spiel, in my view. And it is always deferring responsibility to some other component of Auckland Council. So that is a concern, Mr Chairman. The second matter is around the Mangere Mountain Education Trust statement. And I know it's been sought to be deferred, but what are the changes that the board is seeking? And then, I find it a bit difficult to grasp that those who are seeking to make the amendments are the ones who decide that those amendments are okay. So again, do you have any idea what those amendments are being proposed to that statement?
Through the chair, the general tenor of the comments from the local board was asking the Mangere Mountain Education Trust to strengthen its relationship with the local iwi. And from what I understand, the chair of the Mangere Mountain Education Trust is comfortable and has made the changes recommended. We just haven't had time before this report got back to loop back and get to the local board to see if they're happy with the wording. I guess it's just worth noting that while this committee has the delegated power to approve the statement of intent, it is the local board that provides the funding to the Mangere Mountain Education Trust and has the sort of most vested interest in what the trust is undertaking, which is why we thought it was appropriate that the chair of that local board has the final approval in that statement of intent.
Just to be clear, on those amendments that they're seeking.
Yes.
So can I just ask another question in terms of, it says page 7 of 17, the Mangere Otahuhu local board plan outcomes. It says MMET, this is how it contributes, makes a strong statement about the Māori identity of Mangere and some Pacifica underpinnings of that. Can anyone explain what and some Pacifica underpinnings of that means?
I can't, unfortunately. I can get back to you on that with some more detail on that offline if you'd like.
I would like to know what that means.
Okay. Yep, we'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Do you want an answer to your first question or any feedback on your first question about the Maori language? Or just
Well, I'd love an answer, but really I don't know if I'm going to get it.
I think the best we can say is that the statement of intent process starts up again and with letter of expectations in October, November, so that could be included as a priority item for next year.
1 of 7. Carry on. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to express my dissatisfaction with this process, and in no way is this directed at staff. My difficulty is, in terms of accountability, we've got streams of work that are coming through this committee with regard to CCOs. We've got some that's going through the planning committee, which is chaired by Councillor Darby. We've got some that comes through the appointments committee, and you end up in a really unsatisfactory way of not having those clear lines of accountability. In terms of signing off the SOIs today, I think a lot of good work has been done, and we have outstanding officers who are supporting us. But for us to come to grips, and I know Panuku is one that I'd like to spend a bit more time on, but because of the split accountability, it just means that we really never get to do the deep dive, and we are not having clarity in terms of the monitoring and building the relationship, and for councillors to absolutely, and members of the IMSB, understand what is taking place in our CCOs. Now, given the importance of our CCOs in terms of what level of business they are conducting on behalf of us as a group, I think that we're not doing justice to it. Now, this is a governance issue, and you can probably rule me out of order here, Mr. Chairman, but I wanted to come along. I've got a bad case of a heavy head cold, but I wanted to come along today to say it's just not good enough. You know, in a governance sense, and it's no disrespect to you, sir, in the chair, you've got delegations, but they are limited. Who is it that has the oversight, other than the mayor? Who is it who has the oversight on all of the factors in terms of the delivery of council outputs with the CCOs? And I don't know whether any other councillors share my concern on this. In the last term of council, we had Councillor Holst chairing a CCO committee where most of that work was channeled directly through her, and there was much clearer oversight. Now, either, in my opinion, everything should come here, or we should look at doing some kind of review to ensure that the questions that are being asked by Councillor Simpson, the questions that are being asked by the IMSB, there is a proper channel to direct this to, and that when our boards of CCOs are coming to us, that they know the buck stops here. This is the committee that it comes to. So, like a Senate committee where, you know, people can interrogate the outcomes. Parliament has a similar thing in terms of select committees where you know the buck stops at one point. And I just feel that this is unsatisfactory. We're not doing justice to the boards of CCOs, but we're certainly not doing justice to ratepayers with the way that the oversight that we're giving, given the importance and the way in which we rely on well-functioning CCOs. So I wanted to make that point. I'm not trying to be difficult, but I would like for you as chair to take this up, perhaps with your co-chairs on areas of responsibility for CCOs, and perhaps give us some guidance at our next meeting to make sure that we can come up with something just a little more satisfactory.
Councillor Fletcher, you're not alone. I think we know it needs looking at to a degree, and I suppose an example, and there's nothing wrong with what Councillor Casey brought up, but that was a non-financial issue, but it was relevant to bring up maybe, but perhaps in another committee when the CCOs were here. But that's where we get crossover. We're even in the other committees, and there'll be financial questions asked, and we get crossover in this committee. So just to ask Councillor Cashmore.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Councillor Fletcher raises a point that's certainly of interest and concern to some. I'd also remind councillors that we are actually having 3-hour sessions with each CCO on a rotating basis, which we've never had before, which is a chance and an opportunity for all councillors to be having deep dives with all of those CCO boards present, or as many as it can be, at those 3-hour sessions. And from memory, we've done RFA, ATED and AT,
Watercare.
And Watercare. So that will just continue through the CCOs, then it'll rotate around. So that's sort of probably 6 times more than what we've ever had before. They used to come in for half-an-hour sessions in previous terms. So I think we are getting a bit better understanding, a bit better cross-flow of information about what CCOs are proposing as compared to what we are asking from them. The reporting can always be improved, of course, And I take Councillor Fletcher's point about the diverse inputs back to the various committees, and that's something we may review when we do the year-long, or the one-year-old look at the committee structure of council, which is coming up at the Mayor's discretion, I believe, in November.
Well, I welcome the review, but I would have to disagree. I think that we did spend time in the last term of council in the way that you've outlined, and that's to be encouraged. But the boards of the CCOs need to know where they are reporting and that there is clarity around, with these SOIs, we're never going to see the best possible performance out of these CCOs unless there is clearer accountability. I can't make my point clearer than that. I think that a review is overdue.
Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Halls?
Thank you. I had another point to make, but just a couple of issues. I do agree that I think a review would be really, really useful. I think it was a good attempt at trying to get the CCOs to connect in with the committees that they had interaction with, but I think it is unnecessarily complicated, and I support a review. I also just want to gently correct the Deputy Mayor. We did have a series of workshops that the staff were instrumental in setting up with our CCOs in the last 18 months of the council, when it was realised that we needed more time with them, and we worked our way right through all the CCOs. Sadly, the attendance at those workshops was somewhat lacking. The issue that I wanted to raise, Mr Chair, was just to support Member Taipere, and I was actually going to raise the issue of bilingual signage as part of the Te Toa Takatini work. My kind of sense of this is that we aren't going to get, we can put it in all the SCIs we want, but until we make a decision as a policy of this council and the governing body to say we will have bilingual signage, we'll put money in the budget and we'll progressively work our way over the next decade or whatever, that we can't put anything in an SCI unless we do it seriously. And when you look at what Rotorua's done, I think it's fantastic. I cheer it on, and it's something that I would like us to maybe discuss in the next item. I think we're well overdue to have the discussion about bilingual signage. I think it's appalling that we don't, and I think it is our point of difference as a country that we have completely neglected bilingual signage when they do it all around the world. So I'll be raising that in support of the IMSB at that item.
Thank you, Councillor Halls. Councillor Darby Hills and Member Taipere. And Councillor Newman.
Thank you. Thank you,
Oh, yes.
Chair. I think the Mayor would like to move.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Sorry, I'll formally move the recommendation. Mr Chairman, I don't want to speak at length on it other than to say I look forward to sorting out the situation with Watercare. I think that's important. I want to say about the accountability of the CCOs. These statements of intent are tighter than they've been before. The letters of expectation were tighter. We have had situations where we've had each CCO in here and we've had 3 hours to delve into what they're doing. In Parliament you get an hour if you're lucky with a minister. We've had 3 hours each time with each of the CCOs, and I will pick up Councillor Hulse's point that sometimes the attendance ought to be better at those workshops, because this is a valuable opportunity to hold the CCOs to account. They are called council-controlled organisations, despite their appearances to the contrary at times, but we do have the opportunity here, and the challenge is to take advantage of that opportunity when they are before us. And they are frequently before us, and we are workshopping some of those CCOs to death. We had a long time looking at a workshop yesterday involving Panuku on a specific topic. So I think we do have those opportunities. It's up to us to make sure we utilise those opportunities to hold the CCOs to account. But I'm happy to move the recommendations, Mr Chairman.
I'll second, Mr Chair.
Councillor Darby can second. Councillor Darby?
Thank you. Mr Chair, I don't have any questions now because I asked my questions when the letters of expectation came here. We saw the drafts come back. We saw the shareholders' comments. We had another opportunity, and there's also been time since this agenda was published, which I've taken advantage of, and I've had my advisors go over the 3 key ones that report into planning, ask further questions, and my final questions were with our own infrastructure staff this morning. Just to round things off, we have had an eternity to do this job and do it well, and I would have to say that this is the strongest direction I have seen in my 4 years, starting here in late 13, that I have seen from this governance group to the CCOs. Nothing has come near it. And I reflect on the first time I saw a report as a somewhat green Auckland councillor in, I think it was November 2013, when a paper came before your former committee, and it was the letters of expectation, and it was moved, seconded, and it was the hammer was just about to go down on it without a word of discussion, not a single word. And I said, oh, hold a minute, is this, in my naive Auckland councillor position at that time, only just coming to the role, is this where we start to direct the CCOs? And the staff, of course, said yes. And suddenly the discussion became quite enlivened. It could have just been rubber stamped. And my feeling was it had been too rubber stamped in the past, and it is well directed from this office, this group now. I want to just reflect on a couple that report into the Planning Committee. One, I want to commend Panuku Development Auckland. They have reflected in their final document the new direction that we're setting them on. And if you compare this SOI with the former SOI, this is a very different direction that we're asking Panuku Development Auckland to go on. We're asking them to look at specific strategic outcomes. It is not just about building stuff. It is about meeting those key strategic outcomes at whatever they do. And I won't go over the SOI, but it is a real game changer for this city when we conclude this SOI with them. The other one is Auckland Transport's SOI, and some of the highlights there, Mr. Chair, I think we need to just daylight. We're giving high priority to developing business cases for mass transit. First time up, it's city centre to airport, of course, on the back and in tandem with the Planning Committee's decision of a week or so ago to prioritise the spatial planning for that route. So we're doing that in tandem now with Auckland Transport, but not only mass transit to the airport, it's airport to botany. Airport to botany, and I don't think Aucklanders have quite got the pace that we're ramping up here. And we're also looking at property purchases to protect those routes, those respective routes in this SOI. 6 rail stations are being gated, park and rides at 4 peripheral stations, new bus rollout in the west, the east, the central and the north shore in the life of this SOI. Roads and Streets Framework, Transport Design Manual, all new work, all new work. Progressing smarter transport pricing, even my own local Lake Road is now gone past indicative business case, and in this SOI there is commitment to business case and updated KPIs. But I want to draw the attention of everybody around this table to a couple of particular pages that I think in the past I could be referred to as a filler forward by a chairman. This is by no means a filler forward. It is quite an enlightening introduction to the SOI from the Chair of Auckland Transport, Dr. Lester Levy. And of course, his introduction, in a way, is on behalf of us. He is reflecting our governance in the words that he writes here. And I urge you all to read this. His overview is nothing less than enlightening. It also lays out some challenges for us. He talks about us being on the cusp of transformational change, and I'm quoting him here, these are not my words. He talks about taking the plans off the page and delivering them on the ground. He talks about doing that in 6, 9 and 12 years, not 30. He talks about congestion is merely a symptom. It's a symptom of our problems, and he goes on to talk about the conflating of population growth and the underinvestment of former councils. He also talks about, and I'll leave it here, the implausibly slow decision-making process. And that is a barrier to decongesting Auckland. The implausibly, emphasis on his word, not mine, implausibly slow decision-making process. So I believe the chair of Auckland Transport is referring not just to his organisation in making sure he lubricates the decision-making process there, but he is also referring to the decision-making process around this table and the committees that support this table. Thank you, Chair.
I think he's possibly also referring to certain acts of parliament, but also maybe central government coming to the party.
He could be.
Instead of being in denial for many years. We have Councillor Hills, Councillor Newman, Councillor Casey.
Yes.
And this is questions and statements. So.
Thank you, Chair. No, I just will support what's going ahead. Obviously, I have no experience with what happened previously, but I thought this process was quite good. I think we had a couple of goes at the letters of expectation and a couple of goes at the statements of intent. And I feel like we've met with each of the CCOs 2 or 3 times in 9 months, which is pretty, I thought was quite good. And I also noticed, you know, there's the long list of changes that happened from our recommendations and our discussions with the CCOs, but I think they've really responded. Auckland Transport's, you know, sort of phenomenally changed towards more public transport, cycling and walking in there, and I was surprised to see some quite, not surprised, but I was happy to see some statements from Lester Levy in there about that it's too slow and we need to be doing now, not thinking about when today's, you know, kids are outside of university and in the workforce.
That's a good statement, yeah.
And I think it's so important that that's being pressured from all sides of the decision making. Also, ATEED, I want to give them a bit of a ups. You know, they've really gone the extra mile. They've had a lot of criticism from a lot of quarters, and they've actually made it really clear what their purpose is. They've made it even more clear exactly what the funding they're getting is for and what the outcomes we want as a council and as a community. And, you know, just going through everyone's RAFs, really explaining the things that they're doing to celebrate Auckland and, you know, the benefits that some of the CCOs are bringing, or all of the CCOs are bringing through to make Auckland better and to get a lot of economic activity, but social and the other exciting outcomes. And Panuku, obviously, there are a multitude of things that are going on. But I did find this process pretty good. You know, I do feel like we have, you know, a lot of people say, we have no control, it's undemocratic, all that sort of thing. But I felt like the CCOs that came really did listen and are trying to respond to the questions we've asked, the concerns we've had, and to really strengthen, you know, to show not only us, but the public that they're listening to the public and listening and wanting to work with us. So I'm quite excited. You know, I didn't have a lot of criticisms personally before this process of the CCO, so I'm glad to see it strengthened going forward and we can only get better. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question about Panuku and then a comment. So you drew the attention of the committee to the changes set out in the draft statement of intent, substituting maximise and maximising for optimise and optimising. Can you just clarify the purpose of that?
Well, when we had Auckland Council investments, their sole objective was to maximise revenue from sale of land. That changed when they evolved into Panuku, which is a development company where obviously we're setting up placemaking situations with the transform, unlock and support scenarios where they are there in a situation where, let's face it, they could be doing trade-offs where they're just trying to optimise the outcomes in that area. And Manukau is obviously a classic example where, you know, you can have a win here and you're just making some trade-offs. So.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. Well, I think you're right. Well, you are right. And I just draw the attention of the committee key initiative 12 under Pānuku, which is set out on page 13 of the draft statement of intent. I actually think that Pānuku is being very diplomatic. It says, Pānuku recognises the shareholders' wish to ensure full value for money from its CCOs and for the realisation of savings, and it goes on to make the comment about the reorganisation, but it says is considerably in excess of the commitments of the two legacy organisations. So yes, I can understand the ambitions there for the council in terms of what we want to achieve as a shareholder, and obviously we want to get a good return on the divestment program. But I'd just reiterate, and I do want to acknowledge Pānuku for the work that they are doing at Barrowcliff. Notwithstanding, I think that we have been a bit incoherent around our expectations at Barrowcliff. They will have to make a big trade-off to maximise the quantum of affordable housing at that location, and I don't think that will be the first location where they have to do that. So my hope is that with respect to Pānuku, that the focus is on optimise and not maximise, because optimise is the only way that they can actually get the unlock to deliver some of those outcomes which go wider than just the financial return. So, and I think that will be an ongoing challenge. The Chief Executive has identified that as a challenge, the Chief Executive of Pānuku has identified that as a challenge for them. I do note the design of a replicable closed tender for mana whenua process, which I assume starts at Barrowcliff. If that is the case, then that is potentially a really valuable partnership opportunity, but that should not exclude other organisations such as the Housing Foundation, which obviously have an interest in the delivery of affordable housing, albeit a different model again. So I support the draft statement of intent, Mr. Chair, but the challenge actually is for the shareholder to not be incoherent with our expectations of Pānuku when it comes to divestment of land that could contribute to an increase in the quantum of affordable housing.
There certainly are some other challenges when it comes to that, like that example of Barrowcliff, as compared to the easier options within the town centres, etc. We were trying to do the placemaking, but yeah, that is a challenge, and I think that's something in the LTP we will be putting some time and thought into, and I would think a fair amount of discussion, because that relates to just it's another part of the whole optimisation policy we have with moving land on and buying other land, so that is a challenge going forward. So thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Casey?
Well, I just had another question, Mr. Chairman, and given the absence of the CCOs, I'll just raise it as an issue into the future when we do get them before us, and that is, in some of these statements of intent, there is talk of strategic partnerships, and there is no doubt this council is very keen to look for alternative funding sources. But with respect to strategic partnerships, I'm interested in who the partners are and what our shared values, what is it they use? Shared values and common goals and values. And I'll give you two examples in this statement of intent. One of them is Sky City as a strategic partner for ATEED. And I'm interested in that, what that actually means. It's the first time I've realised that we ATEED have signed something. Does that mean that we as Auckland Council have signed it? And if so, what is it we are up for in terms of that relationship? I see that Pānuku is interested in developing international partnerships. Again, I'm interested in what does that actually mean in terms of the future. RFA, naming rights and so on. We've talked about this a lot, but I'm not clear at all what's guiding all of this and whether we found out about it when it's too late. For example, nobody ever asked us if we should go into partnership with Sky City, and yet now they're a strategic partner.
Without getting into the specifics of each of those deals, and I guess I'll start with a general comment about CCOs. The greatest gift that you, as governors, can give to the CCOs is a gift of clarity. Now, in the instance of sponsorship and naming rights, this council has a corporate sponsorship policy which is there to guide CCOs and those sorts of partnerships. So there is that guidance there. In regards to Sky City and other international partnerships that Panuku is looking, I think you said it at the beginning, as a group we are looking for alternative sources of financing. So for Panuku, that is looking for partners for development projects, and the Fuwa proposal for the waterfront hotel is an obvious example there. AT's relationship with Sky City, I don't know the specifics, but AT has a role in attracting conferences and the like to Auckland because of the bed nights and economic development opportunities they present now with Sky City building a convention centre. That could be the rationale for that link up there. We can come back to you about the specifics. But I guess going back to my original general point, if there are specific types of partnerships that you want, or perhaps more particularly do not want, then that needs to be clearly articulated to the CCOs. Otherwise, they will go about their business in trying to get alternative sources of financing and trying to deliver on the objectives that you have set with them using other partners. That's what we've asked them to do.
So I think probably what I need to see is a corporate sponsorship policy. Is that something that we could...
Well, I think, Councillor Casey, if you look on page 79 in relation to ATED and Sky City, it actually goes back to, remember you raised the question when we had the local government conference here, and how come it ended up at Sky and not, with our own convention centre. I mean, ATED obviously has the role where it has to promote equally all the convention centres, whether it be down in Manukau or West Auckland or whatever. So I think that's the relationship, and it does mention that there on page 79.
Yeah.
They're just promoting Auckland as a tourism sector and obviously promoting Sky City conventions equally as RFA Convention Centre.
Oh, well, with respect, since we're on that, they equally promote gambling, which is their core business. And with Alistair asking, what is it we want? Do we want, look, we wouldn't expect a tobacco company now to name one of our buildings. That'd be ridiculous. But in 10 years' time, maybe we'll be saying the same about gambling, about a casino being involved in our events and our buildings and whatever else. So just that. I would like for us to say we don't want sponsorship for gambling, alcohol and whatever else. Prostitution.
Okay.
Weapons.
What do you call them?
I don't know whether they're sponsoring
Our ethical
Sky
investment
City.
policy is one that we should maybe apply to our sponsorship deals.
We hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Just a couple of things in terms of Panuku. One is with the amalgamation of properties and waterfront, my understanding was that waterfront would be getting away from doing events, etc., etc. But on page, where are we? Sorry, I got distracted there. Lost the page, but it talks about activating the waterfront, it talks about events, it talks about counts and things like that. I just want to understand why we're having ATED fostering events and doing all that kind of research. RFA have an event centre down there, and then we've got waterfront getting itself involved in these, and I would have thought this would be an opportunity for them to start pulling away from that, and our council family taking it up, the CCOs that are doing that, rather than them having staff doing that stuff and counting and doing all that. We've probably got those sorts of resources in other CCOs, and so I see a way hand in hand where we don't have to duplicate. So have you got any comments, or lost my page now?
The role in events, obviously, yes, ATED has a role in regional events, which through the statement of intent, you have set particular drivers for them, and that's largely the regional return on investment, generating bed nights and the like. Panuku's role in events is more in the placemaking, activities, in-yard quarter, Particularly that was to generate interest in that as a place to invest, to get people going back down there, and now hopefully buying apartments or setting up businesses down there. So they're not, the purpose for which the events each of the entities is doing is different, and the scale is different. There is some common elements to what they do in organising events, and from what I understand, they work across the group with council staff as well as CCO staff in some of the delivery matters. So I don't think the overlap and duplication is perhaps as great as it
But
may be.
it'd be really nice to that to be looked at, because I think we've got 4 lots of parts of council that do events. Actually 5 with local board events, and it starts to just get a bit crazy when we could do that. The other question is around, it's probably our page 188 and such, around delivering on Māori outcomes. We're talking about working in partnership with Māori to enable investment in commercial and housing opportunities, and as a member of the Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei Reserves Board, you know, it starts to come to my attention looking at, you know, that we've got Panuku looking at cultural centres, but I don't even know if Panuku even know what the aspirations of Ngāti Whātua are. And I would really ask you, Mr Mayor, to get a heads of, you know, the heads around the table, because it seems something could be going off somewhere else, somebody else wants to do something else, or it could undermine the very people who should be doing this, and we're doing it. We're looking at doing these things. So I think we need to have some earlier conversations that haven't happened, because I just see this as, it's a bit of lip service, but it's also we're not talking to the right people. Panuku are not talking to the right people. And so I do think that before we go hiving off building some sort of cultural centre, maybe we should talk to the people that know this and understand this, and this is their, I suppose, their domain, so that we can give a bit of a steer to Panuku rather than something coming from them. I just don't think it's the right place. So I think that this sort of stuff's here, but they're not doing the talking that they need to do. And I don't want us duplicating. I'd really appreciate that, Mr Mayor, if you got the right people around the table to speak together. What up?
It's been noted by Eddie as well, I notice. Right, well, we have no more speakers, so I'm going to put the resolutions. Moved by Mayor Goff and seconded by Councillor Darby. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Passed, and passed unanimously.